Good morning. This is the Year 5 Maths Workshop for Parents. Let's just share my screen. Here we go. So in this session, we will consider what will my child learn about, how does my child learn maths at Castlemead School, and how can I support my child to be successful at maths. So the national curriculum aims are based on the 3 areas of maths, and those are the computational and procedural skills. So the area in maths where we use numbers to calculate. So it's what we would normally think of as maths. So adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, using fractions, percentages, decimals, those kinds of things. Then there is the conceptual understanding. So that's all of the ideas that lie underneath those numbers and how we use them. So what we want is for children to understand what they're doing with the numbers, not just simply manipulating them. And then finally, we want children to bring together their understanding by reasoning to solve problems. So you can see this reflected in the aims. So the first one is about becoming fluent in the fundamentals of mathematics. So that's about being fluent in how they add, subtract, multiply and divide numbers, knowing certain facts like number bonds. So that's which numbers go together to make another number, like, for example, number bonds to 10. And times tables is a key part of that. The next part is about reasoning mathematically, so bringing together the things that you've been learning about and using that to reflect on a problem, to discuss mathematics and to solve problems. And then finally, there is that part about solving problems. So every lesson in normal circumstances involves solving a problem, and we get children to practice using the other aspects of their maths through discussions about how they're going to solve that problem and in actually solving the problem itself. So in Year 5, in the national curriculum, Year 5 goes with Year 6 as part of Upper Key Stage 2. So in the expectations are that children extend their understanding of the number system and place value to include large integers or large whole numbers. So this is the principal focus, the main focus, as you would expect. And children are developing connections between multiplication and division with fractions, decimals and percentages. Oh, and ratio as well. Then moving on, they're using this, as I've already said, to solve a wider range of problems than they would have done before. And those problems will involve increasingly complex properties of numbers and arithmetic, and the problems themselves will demand efficient written and mental methods of calculation. So children will have learned a whole range of different ways of calculating, but it's now choosing which one is the most efficient way to solve those problems. Moving on, the children are now consolidating and extending their knowledge that they've developed through learning about geometry and measures, classifying shapes with increasingly complex geometric properties, and learning the vocabulary they need to describe them. They should be fluent in written methods for all 4 operations. So by that we mean addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. But that should include long multiplication and division, and in working with fractions, decimals and percentages. And then finally, children need to read, spell and pronounce mathematical vocabulary correctly. And that's really important so that children are able to express their understanding or their line of thinking when they're solving problems. So there are 7 areas in maths that your child will be learning about, and those are place value, addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, fractions, which includes decimals and percentages, measurement, properties of shape, position and direction, and statistics, which means it involves collecting data and representing that data in various ways, including in graphs and charts. So how does your child learn maths at Castlemead School? So we use something called Mastery, a Mastery approach. So the main tenets of that approach are that the maths should be achievable for all children. So we have high expectations of all children, regardless of how confident they feel about maths. And we encourage them to have a positive can-do mindset towards maths. So that's really important, because if they're able to have that kind of mindset, then the chances are that they will be successful. We also help them to develop greater resilience when they come across challenges. And the idea, again, is that if they are able to persist and persevere, then they're more likely to be successful when they're faced with a challenge, rather than just giving up as soon as they see it might be a little bit tricky. The next thing is that their learning should be deep and sustainable. So lessons are designed with careful small steps, questions and tasks in place to ensure that learning is not superficial. And this is related to the next point, that that maths builds on previous learning. So each year children learn about similar things, but then they learn a little bit extra to build on to what went before. And there's a continuum across the school, so you can see the progression in learning across the school. Children learn to reason about a concept and make connections. That making connections is really important in terms of that developing that depth of understanding. So recognizing patterns and understanding the concepts, as I said earlier, about behind what they're doing, so that they really understand that very well. Children develop conceptual and procedural fluency. Again, I referred to that in that first slide. So this is what people normally think of when they're thinking about maths. The teachers move maths from one context to another using objects, pictorial representations, equations, and number problems, or word problems more generally. And there are high expectations for pupils to learn times tables and key number facts so that they're automatic. And this helps children to have a real, true sense of number. Children are also encouraged to think whether their method for tackling a given calculation or problem is appropriate, reliable, and efficient, because they will have learnt many different ways of approaching a problem or a calculation, and they now need to streamline that so that they can select something that is appropriate, as I said, reliable and efficient, and they're likely to be successful. Problem solving is central to what children are learning. As I said, in normal circumstances, children would be faced with a problem in every single lesson. That's really at the heart of mathematics. So this helps children's understanding of why something works, so that they truly have an appreciation of what they are doing, rather than just learning to repeat routines without grasping what's actually happening. Finally, children are given challenge through greater depth. So rather than moving children on to learning for the next year group, children are given tasks to deepen their knowledge and improve their reasoning skills within the objectives for their own year group. The CPA approach is very much part of the Mastery approach. So CPA stands for Concrete, Pictorial and Abstract. And this is a recognised way in which children learn mathematics. So the concrete is using objects and resources to manipulate or move around to help children explore their understanding or to demonstrate their thinking. They then normally move on to the pictorial stage, where they're demonstrating their thinking through diagrams, images, drawings or models. And then finally, they're able to represent that using signs, symbols and digits in the standard way. So these are some examples to show you what that might look like. And you can see that for the concrete stage, the child has used Lego and sweets, and you know, there are things all around us that are super for showing or developing the understanding, and Lego certainly is one of those things. But on that first picture, you can see the Legos being used alongside the abstract notation for fractions. In the second picture, you can see that you've got the concrete in the sweets, but you've also got a diagram showing how 30 is being split up into fifths, and that 6 is 1/5 of 30 each time. So therefore that 3/5 of 30 is 18. So you've got the concrete, the pictorial and abstract all in one there. This page shows you moving further along, just you've got the pictorial and the abstract, along with the use of language. Accurate mathematical language is really important. So you can see the child's using images of holes split into eighths with 3/8 shaded. They're using the abstract notation to show how they're calculating those fractions, but also using a number line. So again, that's more diagrammatic. And on the right-hand page, you can see how they've used bars to represent the fractions as well to support their understanding. And they've explained what they've done in each method. They've used language like numerator, denominator, improper fraction, product, convert. All of those are specific terms which we would expect children to be using in upper key stage 2. So that's really important. So how can you support your child to be successful with their mathematics? So I would say the most important thing is that you help your child to have that positive mindset around maths. So if you're somebody that doesn't feel very confident about maths, try not to convey that to your child. Try always to talk about maths in a positive way. As I said earlier, if your child has a positive attitude to maths, the chances are much greater that they will be more successful. They're likely to fulfill their potential. Useful things for your child to be learning about are number bonds to 10, 20 and 100. They may know those things already, but if they don't, they're worth practicing. If they know them, they're still worth practicing things that you know to really secure that knowledge. Times tables, facts to 12 times 12. Again, your child might know those things, but it's still worthwhile practicing, getting them to speed up. How fast can they go? Later on, I'll come to some useful websites, but obviously Times Table Rockstars is a really good one for increasing speed. Doubles and halves of numbers, that's really useful, just having that information to hand without having to think hard about it. Really will help them when they're trying to solve those more complicated calculations or problems. Knowing equivalent fractions, percentages and decimals is really important. So knowing that half is the same as 50% and that's the same as 0.5, that's really important. Okay. So some top tips I've already mentioned: using positive language when you're talking about maths with your child. Playing maths games together is a really good thing. So it may not be you, because we realise that at the moment things are really quite challenging for you, especially if you're trying to work at home yourself and support your child, and you may have other children that you need to support at the same time. So that's really difficult. So children might play maths games with each other, but if you get the chance, that can be really useful. So all sorts of games can be helpful, even things like jigsaw puzzles, which can help your child with logical and spatial awareness skills. Board games with dice help them with their counting. Darts, Scrabble and chess are fantastic with math skills. If you can learn your child's methods for maths, that can be really powerful. Again, we realise that that takes time. Please try not to show them ways that you were taught, because that might confuse them. particularly if it's at odds with what we're teaching them. So listen to them, see what they're doing, and support them if you can. Practicing reading the time is really important. So children are surrounded by digital time on clocks, watches, computers, the internet, but telling the time using analog clocks and watches is really important, still part of the curriculum. Children need to be doing that. So if you get any chance to practice that, that's really powerful. Using fractions in everyday life. So again, if you're somebody that's not very confident about that, just use the fractions that you know. That's absolutely fine. Just make sure that the fractions or the parts are all exactly the same size. It could be just as simple as talking about what's on their plate at dinner time, you know, or you've got a pizza, you know, and I want to have half a pizza, so how much will you have? If I split this pizza into quarters, how many parts will there be? Those kinds of questions. It doesn't need to be anything complicated. Times tables, as I mentioned already, is really important. What we want to do is free up children's working memory, so they're not sitting there when they're faced with quite a complex problem and they're still trying to work out their times tables. If they know it automatically, then that will make a profound difference. If you can involve your child in problem solving, then that could be really helpful. So particularly things around shopping, you know, what's the best deal? How much will this cost if it's 30% off? Those kinds of questions. Open questions. So rather than asking them a question whether there's a specific answer, think of something where there's an open, you know, there are a range of different answers that they might be able to give you and that they would all possibly be correct. Finally, play to their love of technology. Now, we realise at the moment then children might well be spending an awful lot of time on devices, but if there's a moment and it's appropriate, then there are all sorts of websites and apps that can be really useful in supporting your child to practice their math skills. So with that in mind, if we look at this next page, I've got a whole host here. So many of you will be familiar with White Rose because that's often the way that children are learning about their maths at the moment. Times Table Rockstars, I've already mentioned. Your child should have a username and password. If not, please do get in touch and I can find that for you. Top marks, hit the button is another way to practice times tables, but also doubles and halves, number bonds, really good. And the children really like that website. Just looking through, BBC Bite Size can be very useful. Maths Dictionary for mathematical language. Enrich, if you want more of a challenge for your child, that's very good. Again, creates all sorts of situations and problems where there are open-ended solutions. So there isn't one specific answer. So that's part of what makes it more challenging. Third space learning, you might find useful as parents. You might find some very useful information, particularly on their blog. And then my favorite one is the Khan Academy. It is American, but you'll see on there that it illustrates lots of the ways that we teach maths using that mastery approach that I mentioned earlier. It's very clear. So other than that, then I have come to the end. If you think of any questions or you're not sure about something, then please do contact the school office and ask for me to answer your questions, and I'll be very happy to help if I can. All right, thank you very much for watching. Let's just stop sharing. There we are. Bye-bye for now.